Lydia Carter didn't cry when her father signed the paper. She stood straight, chin up, hands folded tight against her stomach to keep them from shaking. Josiah Crane took the document with a smile that made her skin crawl. And then a shadow fell across the doorway. Wide shoulders, worn leather, a face carved from stone, and silence. The stranger didn't speak to Crane. He looked only at her. And in a voice low enough to belong to the mountains themselves, he said, "She goes with me." If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The morning Josiah Crane rode into the Carter homestead, the summer heat was already sitting heavy on the land, like a debt that couldn't be paid. Which, as it happened, was exactly what he'd come to collect. Lydia saw him from his garden. She knew who he was before he'd even cleared the fence line. Everybody in the valley knew Josiah Crane, the way you know a storm by the color of the sky before it arrives. He wore his wealth like a weapon. Polished boots, silver watch chain, a smile that never reached his eyes. He had 2 men riding behind him, and they moved the way hired muscle always moves, slow, deliberate, making sure you noticed them. She set down her basket and walked to the porch. Her father was already there. Thomas Carter was a proud man by nature, but 3 seasons of drought and a late frost that killed the last of the corn had done something to his spine. He stood straighter than he had any right to given what he owed, but Lydia could see it in the set of his jaw, the particular tension of a man who already knows what's coming. "Mr. Carter." Crane tipped his hat. Didn't tip it to her. "Lovely morning. Mr. Crane." Her father's voice was steady. "Barely." "You're early." "The bank doesn't keep farmers' hours, I'm afraid." Crane stepped onto the porch without being invited, which was the sort of thing he did because he could. "I trust you've had time to consider my offer." Her father said nothing. That silence cost him everything. "Thomas." Crane's voice dropped softer now, which was somehow worse than sharp. "You owe the Crane Land and Cattle Company $460. That's 3 years of notes. 3 years of patience on my part, I might add." He paused. "The bank in Helena has agreed to foreclose by the end of the month unless I advise them otherwise. Now, I could do that." He let the sentence hang in the air like smoke. "Or we could come to another arrangement." Lydia stepped forward. "What kind of arrangement?" Crane looked at her for the first time. His gaze moved over her the way a man looks at livestock at auction, assessing, calculating, unashamed. She felt her stomach turn. "You're girls of working age," Crane said to her father as if she hadn't spoken. "Strong. I have need of domestic labor at the Valley House. She serves a term of 2 years, cooking, cleaning, whatever's needed, and I consider the debt cleared." "Whatever's needed?" Lydia repeated, her voice quiet and flat. Crane looked at her again, smiled. "That's right, miss." Her father's hands tightened on the porch rail. "She's my daughter, not a hired hand." "No," Crane agreed pleasantly. "She's collateral. There's a difference." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it out. "Sign that, and your family keeps the land. Your wife keeps her home. Your younger children keep their roof. All it costs you is 2 years of your eldest's time." He tilted his head. "That's a fair trade, Mr. Carter. A very fair trade." The paper hung between them in the hot summer air. Lydia looked at her father. She could see everything moving behind his eyes. The shame, the grief, the arithmetic of a man calculating what he can afford to lose and what he can't. Her mother was inside. Her brothers, 12 and 9 years old, were somewhere in the back field. The homestead had been in the Carter family for 11 years. Her grandmother had died in that house. "Papa." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Don't." He took the paper. Her hands went cold. She watched him read it. Watched him fold it once, twice. Watched his fingers reach for the pen Crane produced from his breast pocket with the smooth efficiency of a man who did this regularly, who had done this to other families, in other yards, on other hot summer mornings. "Papa, Lydia." His voice broke on her name like a branch under too much weight. "I'm sorry." He signed it. Crane folded the document into his coat with the satisfied precision of a man who had always known how this would go. He turned to her with that same dull smile. "You'll be ready to travel by—" "She won't." The voice came from the road. Every head turned. The man on the Appaloosa hadn't been there a moment ago, or if he had, he'd been still enough that none of them had registered him. He sat his horse the way mountain men sit. Horses unhurried, balanced like he and the animal had come to a mutual understanding years ago, and neither of them saw the need to revisit it. He was big, not in the theatrical way of Crane's hired men with their puffed chests and deliberate swagger, just genuinely quietly large in the way of a man who had spent years doing real physical work in hard country. His hat was dusty. His coat was worn at the elbows. His face was weathered past what age alone could account for. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He walked the Appaloosa right up to the fence line and stopped. "Caleb Mercer." Crane's voice had lost some of its oil. Not all of it. Men like Crane don't lose their composure easily, but enough. "I wasn't aware you had business here." "I don't," Mercer said. "Not yet." His eyes moved from Crane to Thomas Carter, to the folded paper in Crane's coat. Then they moved to Lydia. Something shifted in them, brief, private, quickly controlled. "What's the debt?" Crane blinked. "I beg your pardon." "The Carter debt." "What's the number?" A beat of silence. $460. Mercer reached into his saddlebag without hurrying, without breaking eye contact with Crane, and produced a canvas pouch that landed on the top fence post with a heavy, unmistakable sound. The sound of coin. A lot of it. "Count it," Mercer said. Nobody moved. "Count it," he said again, quieter this time, which somehow made it harder to ignore. One of Crane's men stepped forward, picked up the pouch, worked the ties open with thick fingers. He counted in silence. Then he looked at Crane and nodded. Crane's jaw tightened. "This changes nothing regarding the signed agreement." The agreement was contingent on the debt. Mercer's voice was even. "The debt is cleared. The agreement is void." "That's not how contracts—" "Get a lawyer, then." Mercer finally looked away from Crane, looked instead at Thomas Carter, whose face had gone the color of old ash. "Mr. Carter, give him back the paper." Her father stared at him. Why would you—" "I'll explain it to you. Later." His tone wasn't unkind, but it also wasn't patient. "Right now, give him back the paper." Thomas Carter looked at the document in his own hands, as if he'd forgotten he was still holding it. He held it out to Crane. Crane didn't take it immediately. He stood there with his composure rearranging itself into something harder and colder. Then, slowly, he took it. "This isn't finished, Mercer." "No," Mercer agreed. "It probably isn't." He said it the way a man says it'll rain tomorrow, not as a threat, just as a plain statement of how things stood. Crane looked at Lydia one more time. His gaze lingered just long enough to make the meaning clear. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away with his two men behind him. The yard was very quiet. Lydia realized she was gripping the porch post hard enough to leave marks in her palm. She released it, looked at the man still sitting his horse on the other side of the fence. He wasn't looking at her. Now he was watching Crane's retreating dust cloud with the careful attention of a man who doesn't turn his back until he's sure. "Who are you?" she asked. He turned then. Looked at her directly. Up close in the full summer light, she could see his eyes were a pale, clear gray, the kind of color that doesn't give much away. "Caleb Mercer," he said. "I have a place in the Bitterroot Range, North Pass." "I know the Bitterroots." She paused. "I've never heard of you." "That's generally how I prefer it." He swung down from the saddle with the ease of long habit and tied the Appaloosa to the fence post. "May I—" He nodded toward the porch steps. Her father recovered enough to nod. Mercer came up the steps. Standing on level ground, he was even larger than he'd seemed on horseback. He had to angle slightly through the doorframe when her mother opened the door from inside, a dish towel still in her hands, her eyes wide and frightened and confused in equal measure. "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat without removing it, which was old trail courtesy. Full removal was for church and for grief. "I apologize for the disruption." "Who?" Her mother looked at Thomas. "Who is this man?" "That," her father said with a bewildered exhaustion that contained the whole of the morning, "is a very good question." They went inside. Mercer sat at the kitchen table, hat on the table beside him now, and accepted the glass of water Lydia set down in front of him with a brief nod. He didn't touch the water immediately. He looked around the kitchen with the quiet, assessing attention that seemed to be simply how he moved through the world, taking inventory, measuring distances, noting exits. Lydia recognized the habit. Her uncle had come back from the war with the same eyes. "The debt is paid," he said. "Crane has no legal claim to your land or your family." "Why?" Thomas Carter leaned forward. "Why would you do that? We don't know you." Mercer was quiet for a moment. "I knew your father," he said. "Elias Carter, out of the Gallatin Valley." Her father went still. "My father died before I came to Montana." "Yes," Mercer said. "I know. I was there." He picked up the water glass, drank, set it down. "He did me a service once years back when I had nothing. Told me a man pays his debts forward when he can't pay them back. I've been slow about it." A pause. This seemed like the time. The kitchen was very quiet. Her mother had her hand over her mouth. Her father's eyes were red at the rims. Lydia watched Mercer's face and tried to find the angle in it, because there was always an angle that was one thing the frontier taught you early and didn't let you forget. But his face was simply still. Not closed, not deceptive. Still the way deep water is still with weight underneath it, rather than emptiness. "Crane will come back," she said. "Yes." "Paying the debt won't stop him." "No," Mercer agreed. "It won't." "Then what does?" He looked at her directly. That clear gray gaze. "A more complicated conversation than the one we've been having." He turned back to her father. "Crane is moving on land titles across the whole northern valley. He's been paying off the county clerk to backdate claims. At least 4 other families have lost their homesteads in the last 18 months. He's building towards something bigger, a railroad easement from what I can tell. The line they're planning will run through this land, and when it does, this parcel will triple in value overnight." Thomas Carter sat back in his chair. "How do you know all this?" "I make it my business to know what moves through the mountains," Mercer said simply. "Men talk when they think no one's listening. Trappers carry news. Supply riders carry more." He folded his hands on the table. "Crane's going to keep coming at you. The debt was just the easiest lever. When that's gone, he'll find another one." "We can't fight a man like Crane," her mother said quietly. "You don't have to fight him," Mercer said. "Not directly." He paused. "There's a federal land examiner coming through Helena in 6 weeks. A man named Aldridge. He's been assigned to investigate the title irregularities in the northern counties. If someone can get him the right documentation before Crane gets to him first, the whole scheme falls apart." He looked at her father. "I have some of what's needed, letters, a survey map that contradicts Crane's filed claims, but I need access to the county records, and I need someone Crane's men don't recognize on sight." Silence. Lydia felt everyone in the room arrive at the same place simultaneously. "No," her father said flatly. "Papa, absolutely not. Whatever you're thinking, Lydia." "She's thinking clearly," Mercer said without inflection. "Which is more than I can say for the alternative." He turned to her father. "I'm not asking you to send her into danger. I'm telling you the danger is already here. It was here before I rode up this morning, and it will be here after I ride out. The question isn't whether she's safe. The question is whether she has any say in what happens to her." He paused. "You already made that mistake once today." Her father flinched as if he'd been struck. The table held a long silence. Lydia was watching Mercer. He wasn't looking at her. Now he was giving her father the dignity of coming to his own conclusion without being watched. That was deliberate. She understood it was deliberate. "What would it involve?" she asked. Mercer looked at her. "A week's ride into the mountains. 2, maybe 3 days in Helena while I meet with Aldridge's clerk. Then back." He paused. "You'd be under my protection the whole time. You have my word on that." "Your word." She kept her voice level. "I don't know you." "No," he said. "You don't." He picked up his hat from the table, turned it once in his hands. "Your grandfather Elias would, though. He'd tell you my word is one of about 3 things in this world worth trusting." She looked at him for a long moment, tried again to find the angle, the crack in the stillness where the real motive hid. She couldn't find it. She turned to her father. He was looking at his hands, the same hands that had held that pen an hour ago. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years since breakfast. "I'll go," she said. Her father closed his eyes. Her mother made a small sound. Mercer settled his hat on his head. "We leave at first light," he said. "Pack light. 1 bag no more than you can carry yourself. Riding clothes, not Sunday dress." He moved toward the door, then stopped. Without turning around, he said quietly, "Mr. Carter." Her father looked up. "You did what you thought you had to do this morning," Mercer said. "I understand that. But she deserves better than being used as currency." He paused. "So do you." He went out. Through the window, Lydia watched him untie the Appaloosa, check the cinch mount in that same unhurried way. He didn't look back at the house. He rode out to the tree line at the edge of the property and stopped there, his back to them, facing the road Crane had gone down, as if standing guard over the rest of the afternoon. Her mother came to stand beside her at the window. "Lydia," she said softly, "you don't have to." "I know." She watched the still figure at the tree line, the straight back, the easy seat. The way he'd said she deserves better than being used as currency, quiet and direct, like it was simply true and didn't require decoration. "Do you trust him?" Lydia thought about it honestly. "I don't know him well enough to trust him," she said finally. "But I think I know him well enough to go." Her mother didn't answer that. Outside, the summer light moved across the field, and Caleb Mercer stayed where he was, watching the road, patient and still, as everything that lived in the mountains learns eventually to be. Lydia went to pack her bag. They left before the sun cleared the ridge. Lydia's mother had pressed a wrapped bundle of cornbread into her hands at the door, and held on a moment too long before letting go. Her father had stood at the fence post and watched them ride out without saying a word. That silence sat heavier on Lydia's chest than any argument could have. Mercer rode ahead. Not far, just enough to give her the sense that he wasn't watching her, which she suspected he actually was. In that sideways, peripheral way, he seemed to track everything. The Appaloosa moved quietly on the dirt road, and the mule her father had saddled for her, a steady old gray named August, kept pace without complaint. She hadn't slept. She'd lain on her bed in the dark, listening to her parents talk in low voices, through the thin wall, catching words without meaning to. Foolish. Her mother. What choice? Her father. Then a long quiet she couldn't interpret, followed by the sound of her mother weeping softly, the way women on the frontier learned to weep small, contained, so as not to use up anything they couldn't replace. Lydia had stared at the ceiling and made herself think practically. 1 bag. Riding clothes. The small knife her uncle had given her 3 years ago that she kept under her mattress. She packed those things, and she did not let herself think about what her mother's face had looked like when she said goodbye. Now, an hour out from the homestead, the road narrowed and began to climb, and the air changed thinner, cooler, smelling of pine sap, and something older underneath. Mountain air. She had never been this far north. "You didn't eat this morning," Mercer said without turning around. She blinked. "How do you know that?" "You're favoring your left rein. People do that when they're lightheaded and trying not to show it." He glanced back at her. "Eat the cornbread." She wanted to argue on principle. She ate the cornbread. He didn't say anything else for a while, and she found herself watching the way he moved with the horse. Not commanding it exactly, but in conversation with it weight and hand, and small shifts of posture, that the Appaloosa answered before the signals were finished. It was the kind of writing that took years, the kind you didn't think about anymore. "How long have you been in the Bitterroots?" she asked. 11 years. Alone. A beat. Mostly. That doesn't bother you. He considered this with the seriousness he seemed to bring to everything. No, he said finally. Solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing. She thought about that. Most people would say they are. Most people are afraid of quiet. He said it without judgment, just observation. When you're afraid of quiet, you fill it with noise, and then you call the noise company. He adjusted his hat against the angle of the morning sun. That's not company. That's just distraction with a pulse. She almost laughed. It surprised her so much that she pressed her lips together to stop it, and she saw the slight shift at the corner of his mouth that meant he'd noticed. "Your grandfather," she said. "Tell me how you knew him." The shift at his mouth settled back into stillness. "That's a longer story. We appear to have time." He rode for a moment in silence. Then, "I came out of Missouri at 19. No money, no connections, bad judgment, and a talent for getting into situations I couldn't reason my way out of." He paused. "I'd been on the trail about 3 weeks when my horse threw a shoe in a creek crossing and broke her leg. I had to put her down. It was 40 miles to the nearest settlement, and I had $6 and a bedroll." Lydia said nothing, waited. "Your grandfather came through on a supply wagon the next afternoon. He didn't know me. Had no reason to stop." Another pause. "He stopped. He put me up in the wagon, fed me, got me to the settlement. Spent 2 of his own dollars on a horse for me because he said I looked like the kind of young fool who'd try to walk 40 miles and die doing it." Something moved in his voice, not quite warmth, but the memory of it. "He was right. I would have." "He never mentioned you," she said. "No reason he would. He did it because it was right to do, not because he wanted anything back from it." Mercer glanced at her. "He told me the morning he left me in that settlement, he said, 'Boy, every man you help is a debt you've paid to every man who helped you first.'" He looked back at the trail. "I've tried to live by that. Haven't always managed it. But I try." Lydia sat with that for a while. "He was a good man," she said quietly. "Yes," Mercer said. "He was." The trail steepened. August dug in with steady hooves, and Lydia leaned forward slightly with him, and they climbed together through the long summer morning. By midday, they had left the valley entirely behind them and moved into the first real folds of the Bitterroot Range timber country, where the light came down in columns through the canopy and the ground underfoot gave slightly layered with decades of fallen needles. Mercer pulled up at a creek crossing and swung down, and Lydia dismounted without being told, and led August to the water. She was watering the mule when she heard it, the sound that didn't belong. Not an animal sound. Deliberate. A branch placed wrong, a foot landing in a way that tried to be quiet and wasn't quite quiet enough. She looked at Mercer. He was already still, one hand resting on August's neck, with a steadiness that had nothing to do with calming the mule. His eyes moved along the tree line, the way water finds low ground, smooth, unhurried, but always arriving. "Keep drinking," he said low and even. "Don't look." She looked at the creek. Her heart was loud enough that she could feel it in her throat. "2," he said, quieter still. "Left ridge." She didn't ask how he knew. "Crane's men. Too soon for Crane to have organized. Probably opportunists. Road agents." He moved toward the Appaloosa with the same unhurried patience, checking the cinch or appearing to. His right hand was close to the rifle in the saddle scabbard. "When I tell you, you get behind August and you stay there." "I'm not going to." "Lydia." Her name flat and direct. "Behind the mule. Now." She moved. The 2 men came out of the timber on the left ridge at the same time, which meant they'd planned this crossing. They knew where travelers watered, knew the angle of approach. They were mounted, poorly dressed, and the one in front had a pistol already drawn, which was a show of intent, if not a show of intelligence. "Easy now." The front man had the careful cheerfulness of someone who had practiced sounding unthreatening while holding a weapon. "No need for anything dramatic. We just need the saddlebags and the lady's bag. Then you can be on your way." Mercer stood beside the Appaloosa. His hand was at his side. His face was the same as it always was, still without hostility, without fear. "Those aren't available," he said. The man blinked. People apparently did not often respond to armed robbery with a simple declarative sentence. "I beg your what?" "The saddlebags aren't available," Mercer said again. "Neither is the bag. You picked the wrong travelers this morning. I'd recommend you recognize that and ride on." The second man was moving to the right, trying to flank. Mercer didn't look at him, which was interesting. Lydia could see him tracking the movement in his peripheral vision without turning his head. "You're in no position to be making recommendations," the front man said, and the cheerfulness had gone out of his voice, replaced with something harder and more nervous, which was actually more dangerous. "I'm in exactly that position," Mercer said, and his voice was so level, so thoroughly unbothered, that even Lydia, standing behind a mule with her heart hammering, felt the strange calm of it. "You've got one gun on me. Your partner has moved 20 feet to my right and still doesn't have a clear shot because of the tree line. And you've been watching me for about 3 minutes, which means you saw me ride in and you made a calculation about what I am based on my coat and my horse and the woman with me." He paused. "You calculated wrong." The front man's horse shifted under him. The man's grip on the pistol tightened. "Last offer," Mercer said, still in that same quiet tone. "Ride on." What happened next was fast. The second man made his move from the right, went for a shot, and Mercer moved. Not fast, the way theatrical men moved with flourish and noise, but with the compressed economy of someone for whom this was simply a problem to be solved. He pulled and fired twice, and the second man's horse bolted riderless, and when Lydia looked, the man was on the ground holding his shoulder and making sounds that were more surprise than pain, which meant the shot had been placed. The front man stared. Mercer's gun was pointed at him now, steady as a fence post, while the barrel still had smoke on it. "He'll live," Mercer said. "The shoulder's not critical, but the next one isn't the shoulder." He waited. "Ride on." The man rode on. Fast. He left his partner in the dirt by the creek, which said everything about the quality of the partnership. Mercer holstered his gun, walked to the man on the ground, looked at the wound with the clinical detachment of someone doing an assessment. "Through and through. You'll need to bind it before you bleed out." He reached into his saddlebag, produced a strip of clean cloth, because of course he had a strip of clean cloth, and dropped it beside the man. "That'll hold you to the settlement. Ride northeast about 6 miles. The man stared up at him. "Why are you—" "I told you," Mercer said. "I'm not in the business of killing people who don't require it." He went back to the Appaloosa, checked the cinch again, actually checked it this time, and mounted. He looked at Lydia. "Ready." She came out from behind August. Her legs were steady, which surprised her. "You could have shot him somewhere worse," she said. "Yes, but you didn't." "No." He turned the Appaloosa toward the trail. "I generally try to leave people in a condition where they can make better choices tomorrow than they made today." A pause. "Doesn't always take, but I try." She mounted August and followed him across the creek. Behind them, the wounded man was already tying off his shoulder with the cloth, and she told herself not to think about the 2 shots she'd heard and the way everything had happened before she'd fully understood it was happening. They rode for another hour in silence before her pulse came all the way down. "You've done that before," she said. "Done what?" "Talked men out of shooting you. Tried to. Hasn't worked every time." He reached up and touched a spot below his left collarbone. Not a wound now, just the memory of one mapped under the fabric. Then he put his hand back on the rein. She watched that gesture and filed it away carefully. By late afternoon, they had climbed high enough that the valley was gone entirely. She couldn't have pointed back toward home, even if she'd tried. The trees thinned and the rock showed through, and the trail became a thing you had to look for rather than follow. Mercer moved through it without hesitation, reading the landscape the way she read print on a page. "We'll stop here," he said, pulling up at a place where the rock formed a natural windbreak and a seep of water ran down the face of a granite shelf. "2 more hours of light. I want to cover ground while we have it." He built a fire with the focused efficiency of a man who had built 10,000 fires. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sighs. He produced dried meat and hardtack from the saddlebag, and set them near the fire without ceremony, then sat across from her and ate without making a production of it. "How do you know about the railroad easement?" she asked. He looked up, chewed, swallowed. "Supply rider out of Helena mentioned it 3 months back. I listened." Most men don't. Most men are talking. He broke a piece of hardtack in half. "Crane's been buying survey equipment. That's a specific kind of purchase. A man who buys survey equipment isn't interested in farming, he's interested in finding out exactly what he owns down to the inch." He handed her the other half of the hardtack. When a man in land speculation gets interested in precision, it's because someone's offered to buy that precision from him. The railroad. The Northern Pacific Extension. There's a spur line planned for the Northern Valley that isn't on any public map yet, but it'll run within 2 miles of your father's property. He met her eyes. Within half a mile of the Carter's southern fence line. Lydia held the hardtack and did the arithmetic. That land would be worth more than Josiah Crane could buy honestly, Mercer said. Which is why he's buying it the other way. She sat with this. The fire was small and efficient, like everything he did. Somewhere above them, a nighthawk made its sound, that flat nasal call that belonged to dusk, and nowhere else. "The Examiner," she said. "Aldridge. Can he actually stop this? If he gets the right evidence before Crane buries it." Mercer looked at the fire. "Crane has someone in the county clerk's office. The documents that prove the backdating the original survey maps the genuine filed dates, those exist, but they're being suppressed. Aldridge can compel production of county records. Crane can't block that without exposing himself." He paused. "But he can delay it. He can lose things. He can arrange for Aldridge to receive other information, first conflicting, discrediting information that makes the real evidence look doubtful." "And your letters," she said. "The ones you mentioned." He reached into his coat and produced a flat oilskin packet, set it on the rock between them. Letters from 2 of the families Crane displaced, sworn statements about the process, and a copy of a survey map, the original, not the filed version that shows the Carter property boundary predates Crane's claim by 4 years. He tapped the packet. "This gets to Aldridge, the whole structure falls." She looked at the packet. "Then why do you need me?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because I can't walk into the county records office in Helena. Crane's men know my face. I've been a problem for his operation for 2 years. They watch for me in town." A pause. "But they don't know yours." "I've never been to Helena." "No, and Crane's men in Helena have never seen you." He picked up the oilskin packet and held it toward her. "You go into the records office as a private citizen, inquiring about property filings for your family's homestead. Routine request. No one looks twice." He paused. "While you're there, you verify 3 specific filing dates. Write down what you see. Come out, that's all." She took the packet. It was lighter than she'd expected. "And if someone does look twice," she said, "then you're a young woman confused about paperwork, which is a role the world is unfortunately very willing to believe." His voice carried the faintest edge on that, not directed at her, but at the truth of it. "I'll be close. Close enough to be there in under 2 minutes if something goes wrong." She held the packet and looked at him across the small fire and tried again as she kept trying to find the layer underneath the stillness. The calculation. The angle. "Why does this matter to you?" she said. "You paid our debt. You could have left it there. Grandfather's debt to you, you could call that squared and ride back to your mountain and never think about Josiah Crane again." Mercer was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I couldn't." "Why not?" He looked at the fire. Something moved behind his eyes. Private weighted something he had been carrying long enough that it had changed shape with the years. 3 families lost their land before I understood what Crane was building," he said. I saw the pattern late. By the time I had enough to act on, two of those families had already scattered, gone west, gone to relatives in other states. Gone. He paused. I can't fix that, but I can make sure it stops here. He looked up at her. Your family's homestead was the fourth. If I'd moved faster, you wouldn't have been standing on that porch this morning. The fire crackled between them. So this is guilt, she said. Partly. He said it without defensiveness. And partly because it's wrong. A man like Crane takes everything he wants and tells himself it's business. Tells himself people like your father made poor choices and ought to suffer the consequences. Tells himself the land doesn't belong to the people who broke their bodies. Working it, it belongs to the man clever enough to take it. His jaw tightened. I've been watching that story play out my entire life in every county I've passed through. And I'm tired of it. She looked at him for a long moment. All right, she said quietly. He met her eyes. I'm in, she said. All the way. Not just the records office, whatever it takes to bring Crane down. She held up the oilskin packet. This is a start. But you said you've been watching him for 2 years. You have more than this. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. The particular recognition of a man who has made a careful judgment about a person and found that judgment confirmed. Yes, he said. I have more than this. Then we use all of it. She set the packet down on the rock between them, squarely, deliberately. Not just enough to slow him down, enough to end it. Mercer looked at her across the fire for a long moment. Your grandfather, he said finally, would have said the exact same thing in the exact same tone. She didn't smile. But something eased in her chest, the first thing that had eased since her father's hand had reached for that pen. Then let's not waste the night, she said. Tell me everything you know about Josiah Crane. And he did. They talked until the fire burned to coals, and the nighthawk went silent, and the mountain settled into its deep old dark around them. And by the time they stopped, Lydia Carter understood exactly what they were walking into. Not less afraid for understanding it. But something steadier than fear had taken up residence in her chest alongside it, something that felt, if she was honest, a great deal like purpose. Above them the stars came out one by one, clear and cold and indifferent, the way stars always are in high country, and Caleb Mercer sat watch in the dark without being asked. His back to the coals, his eyes on the trail they'd come up. She fell asleep to the sound of the mountain breathing around her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not dream of debt. She was awake before Mercer moved. That surprised her. She had expected him to be the kind of man who rose before anyone else could notice, who had already made decisions about the day, before the day had properly started. But she heard him shift his weight against the rock and opened her eyes, and found him still in the same position he'd been in when she'd fallen asleep back to the dead coals watching the trail. You didn't sleep, she said. I slept some. He stood, rolled his shoulders once with the careful economy of a man managing old damage, and went to check the horses. We need to move. We lost time talking last night. She didn't point out that the talking had been necessary. She pulled on her boots, splashed her face with water from the seep, and was mounted before he finished checking the Appaloosa's shoes. He noticed, didn't comment. But she saw the slight adjustment in how he looked at her, a recalibration small and precise, like a man correcting his aim. They rode hard through the morning. Mercer set a pace that wasn't brutal, but wasn't kind either. The kind of pace that assumed you could keep up, and didn't check to make sure. Lydia kept up. August was steadier than he looked, and she had been riding since she was 6 years old. And somewhere in the second hour of climbing, she stopped thinking about the effort and started simply moving with it, the way you eventually move with anything that demands all of you. By mid-morning they had dropped into a narrow valley. She didn't have a name for following a creek bed east, and Mercer pulled up suddenly and held up one hand. She stopped. He was looking at the trail ahead, not tense, just reading. Then he said, Rider came through here this morning, single horse, moving fast. She looked at the trail, saw nothing. How do you? The grass on the left bank. It's been disturbed recently, and it's bent toward us, which means the horse was going north. The creek mud has a fresh print in it that hasn't filled yet." He glanced at her. "Moving fast means the rider wasn't looking around, which means either they were in a hurry or they knew exactly where they were going. Crane's men, possible." He urged the Appaloosa forward slower now, picking through the creek bed with more attention. "Or a scout. Crane could have sent someone ahead on the mountain route when I didn't show on the valley road." Lydia's stomach tightened. "He anticipated you'd bring me this way. He knows how I move." A pause that carried weight. "I've been a thorn in his operation for 2 years. He's had time to study my habits." He looked back at her. "We'll adjust. There's a longer route into Helena, adds half a day, but avoids the main approach. If Crane has someone watching the north road, they won't be watching the river ford." "Half a day," she said. "Does that put us past Aldridge's window?" "No." He turned the Appaloosa off the creek bed and up a slope that didn't look like a trail until you were on it, and suddenly it was. "We have 2 days before Aldridge's clerk leaves Helena. We get there tomorrow night, we still have time." She followed him up the slope and told herself that 2 days was enough. She almost believed it. They ate in the saddle-dried meat and the last of the cornbread, which had gone stiff but was still good, and by early afternoon the timber had thickened around them, and the light came down in that shifting, dappled way that made distances hard to judge. Lydia was watching the trail behind them when she heard Mercer say her name quietly, and with a particular flatness that she was already learning to read as "Stop moving and pay attention." She stopped. There was a cabin 30 yards ahead. Small old, the kind of structure that had started as something temporary and simply never been finished. A horse was tied outside it. Not the horse from the creek, different animal, heavier, with a dun coat and a brand she recognized from 30 feet away. Crane's Valley Ranch brand. "Don't look directly at it," Mercer said very low. "Keep riding. Normal pace." "There's someone inside?" "Yes." "They'll see us. They'll see 2 riders on a mountain trail. Nothing more if we don't give them more." He moved the Appaloosa forward at the same measured walk, loose-reined, unhurried, the very posture of people who belonged on this trail and had nowhere particular to be. "Talk to me. Casually. Like we're having a conversation about something ordinary. What do I say? Anything. Your voice matters more than the words." She thought for one wild moment and then said conversationally, "August favors his left front when the ground gets rocky. I've been watching it. I think the shoe's seated well, but he's sensitive on that side." "I noticed," Mercer said, matching her tone exactly. "Check it when we stop tonight. Probably nothing but worth looking at." They rode past the cabin. The door was closed. She didn't turn her head. She felt the back of her neck as clearly as she had ever felt anything, the specific animal awareness of being watched from behind something solid. 30 yards passed. 40. 50. "Don't change your pace," Mercer said softly. She didn't. They rounded a curve in the trail, and the cabin dropped behind them and out of sight, and Lydia let out a breath so slowly that it barely made a sound. "He was watching," she said. "Yes. Did he recognize you?" "I don't know." He was quiet for a moment. "We'll find out within the hour. If Crane's man sends a rider ahead, we'll see dust on the north ridge." He looked at the sky, reading it the way he read everything, with that patient, particular attention. "If we don't see dust, he didn't recognize me or didn't think we were worth reporting." He paused. "If we do see dust, we move now and move fast." She looked at the north ridge. She watched it for 20 minutes of riding, her eyes moving back to it every time the trail gave her a clear angle. No dust. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or more frightened, because a man who didn't report immediately might be a man who was going to follow instead. "Say what you're thinking," Mercer said without looking at her. "I'm thinking that not seeing dust might be worse than seeing it." He glanced at her then, that gray gaze level and direct. "Yes," he said. "It might be." He said it the way he said everything true and inconvenient, plainly, without softening it, but also without dwelling on it longer than it required. So we assume we have a tail, and we ride accordingly. He changed their course again, cutting east through timber so dense that the trail disappeared entirely, and they navigated by slope and sun angle, and whatever internal compass Mercer apparently carried in his chest, like a fixed star. Lydia stopped trying to track where they were, and focused entirely on following his line, matching his speed through the gaps, ducking the same branches, trusting that he knew where the ground would hold. It was the most demanding riding she had ever done, and something in her rose to meet it with a fierceness that surprised her. They came out of the timber an hour later onto a rock shelf that looked over a long slope falling away to the west, and Mercer pulled up and turned and looked back at the timber behind them. Nothing moved. "All right," he said quietly. "We lost him. If he was there, yes." He turned the Appaloosa forward again. "The ford is 2 miles east. We'll cross there and come into Helena from the riverside. And then, he said, "we find a man named Walt Briggs." She waited. "Briggs runs a boarding house on the south end of town," Mercer said. "He's one of the displaced landowners I mentioned. His family's homestead was the second one Crane took 18 months ago. He's been in Helena since then, watching, waiting, collecting what he can." He paused. "He has something I don't. He has someone inside the county clerk's office." Lydia went still in the saddle. Inside the office, a clerk named Doris Aldrich, not related to the examiner, different name, different connection. She's been there 12 years. She saw what Crane's man did to the filing records. She kept copies. He said it with the measured care of someone handling something fragile. She's been afraid to come forward alone. Briggs has been protecting her, and they've been waiting for someone with enough standing to take the evidence to. He looked at Lydia. "Aldridge is that someone. So the records I was going to verify are already verified. Doris has them." He paused. "What I need from you now isn't the records office." He met her eyes steadily. "I need you to talk to Doris Aldrich." Lydia held his gaze. "Why me?" "Because Briggs trusts me, but Doris doesn't. She's met too many men who told her they'd protect her and didn't." Something moved in his voice, not quite anger, not quite grief, something in between. "She'll talk to a woman. Briggs told me that 6 weeks ago, and I didn't have a woman to bring." He paused. "Now I do." She absorbed this. The way the plan had shifted around her, or not shifted, she realized. This had always been part of it. He had simply waited to see if she was the kind of person who needed the reason before agreeing or after. "You should have told me this at the start," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have. No excuse, no deflection. I was wrong not to." The directness of it disarmed her more than any justification could have. "All right," she said. "I'll talk to her." They crossed the ford as the afternoon light tilted toward evening, and Helena came up around them gradually. First the smell of it, coal smoke and tannery, and the particular density of too many people in one place. Then the sound, then the buildings rising out of the flats on either side of the main road. Mercer kept them on the riverside, away from the main street, moving through the back alleys, with the practiced familiarity of someone who had mapped this town for exactly this kind of use. Briggs's boarding house was on a narrow street behind a livery, a modest 2-story structure with a painted sign above the door. Mercer tied the horses in the livery without explaining who he was to the liveryman, who apparently didn't need explaining, and they went in through the back. Walt Briggs was a compact, weathered man in his 50s, with the specific look of someone who had once been physically strong and had put that strength aside in favor of something quieter and more dangerous patience. He opened the door before they knocked, looked at Mercer, looked at Lydia, and stepped back to let them in. "You're a day earlier than I expected," he said to Mercer. "Had to adjust the route." Mercer took off his hat. "This is Lydia Carter, Thomas Carter's daughter out of the Gallatin Valley." Briggs looked at her with careful attention. "Carter. That's the 4th holding." "Crane came for the debt yesterday morning," Mercer said. "I cleared it. But he's not done." "No." Briggs moved to the small table in the center of the room and sat. "He's never done. Sit down, both of you. There's been a development." Lydia sat. Mercer remained standing, which she'd noticed was his habit. In unfamiliar interiors, he stayed near the door until he'd finished making his assessment. "Aldridge arrived 2 days ago," Briggs said. "Not in 6 days as scheduled. 2 days ago. Crane has someone in the federal office who told him the schedule was moved up, and Crane got word before we did." He looked at Mercer. "He's already been to Aldridge." The room went very still. "What did he tell him?" Mercer said. "I don't know everything, but Doris heard enough." Briggs folded his hands on the table. Crane told Aldridge that the land claims irregularities were the result of clerical error, honest mistakes already corrected, and that the complaints being filed against him were coming from a group of land squatters with fraudulent original claims. He paused. "He had documents, Caleb. Filed documents notarized that appear to show the Carter homestead, and 2 others were claimed on dates that post-date Crane's purchases." "Forged," Lydia said flatly. "Obviously," Briggs said. "But Aldridge doesn't know that yet. And Crane got to him first, which means Aldridge is going to approach everything we bring him with suspicion already planted." He looked at Mercer. "We have 1 day. Aldridge moves on to the next county day after tomorrow." 1 day. Lydia looked at Mercer. His jaw was set, but his eyes were doing that thing she'd come to recognize moving through the problem, like he moved through timber, finding the line through. "Where's Doris now?" he said. "Upstairs," Briggs said. "She's been here since yesterday. She was afraid to go back to the office after Crane's man came in and spoke to her supervisor." "Crane's man spoke to her supervisor," Mercer repeated, and his voice had gone very quiet. The specific quiet that sat underneath something that could become heat if it needed to. "Told him there'd been complaints about accuracy in the filing department. Suggested a review." Briggs's mouth tightened. It was a message. She understood it. "She still has the copies?" Lydia asked. Briggs looked at her. "Yes, hidden at the house. She didn't dare bring them here in case she was followed." "Then someone needs to go get them tonight," Lydia said. Both men looked at her. "Crane's men are watching Briggs and watching Mercer," she said. "They're not watching me. I'm a stranger in Helena. I came in on the riverside." She kept her voice level practical, laying it out the way Mercer had laid out the plan the night before, plainly without flourish, because the plainness was the point. "Tell me where the house is and tell me what I'm looking for. I'll go tonight after dark." Briggs looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at Lydia. For a long moment he said nothing, and she could feel him doing the calculation, not doubting her. She understood that now, simply being precise about what he was agreeing to, what he was responsible for. "It's a 20-minute walk," he said. "I can walk 20 minutes. If someone follows you, then I'm a woman who got turned around coming back from the market." She held his gaze. "I won't get followed. I know how to be unremarkable, Caleb." It was the first time she had used his first name, and she felt it land between them brief and solid. "Let me do this." Another beat of silence. "All right," he said. Briggs gave her the address, described the loose board under the kitchen window where Doris kept the copies wrapped in oilskin, gave her the particular knock that would tell Doris's neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Fry, that she was safe to open the door. Lydia memorized it. She did not write it down. She went out into the Helena night alone. The streets were busy enough that she was simply a woman walking, and she kept her pace easy and her eyes forward, and she thought about nothing except the next turn and the next landmark and the address Briggs had given her. She passed 2 of Crane's men without knowing it. She would find that out later, and they didn't look at her twice. She found the house, knocked the pattern on Mrs. Fry's door. The old woman opened it a crack, looked at her with sharp, frightened eyes, then stepped aside without a word. The copies were where Briggs said they would be. Lydia tucked the oilskin package inside her coat, thanked Mrs. Fry, and walked back out into the dark. She was 4 blocks from Briggs's boarding house when the hand closed around her arm. She didn't make a sound. She spun, put her weight back, broke the grip the way her uncle had shown her, sharp rotational, using the weakness in the thumb, and had 3 feet of distance, and her hand on her knife before she registered the face. It wasn't Crane's man. It was a woman. Young, dark-haired, breathing fast, wearing the plain dress of a clerk or a shop girl. Her eyes were wide, and she was holding her wrist where Lydia had broken the grip, and she looked all at once terrified and relieved and on the edge of tears. "You're the one Walt sent," she said. It wasn't a question. Lydia looked at her, took her hand off the knife. "Doris Aldrich." "I couldn't stay in that house." The woman's voice was shaking not from weakness, Lydia judged, but from the specific vibration of someone who had been holding themselves together for a very long time and was running close to the end of it. "I kept thinking Crane's man was going to come back. I kept thinking I needed to know someone actually had them. The copies. That they were safe." Her eyes dropped to Lydia's coat, to the line of the oilskin package beneath the fabric. "You have them." "I have them," Lydia said. The woman closed her eyes for one moment, one long shaking breath. "They forged the dates," Doris said. "I watched it happen. I watched a man come in with Fletcher, that's the supervisor, and I watched them pull the original filings and replace them with new documents. And I knew what it meant, and I didn't—" Her voice broke. "I didn't say anything. Not then. I was afraid of losing my position. I was afraid of—" She stopped. "I'm the reason those families lost their land. I could have spoken up." Lydia stood in the dark street with this woman's confession falling on her, and felt for a moment the full weight of everything Crane had built out of fear and compliance and small silences. "You're speaking up now," she said. Doris opened her eyes. They were wet but steady. "I need to give a sworn statement to Aldrich," she said. "In person. That's the only thing that will hold." She looked at Lydia. "Can your man get me to Aldrich safely tonight?" "He can," Lydia said. "Come with me." They went back through the Helena night, side by side, and Lydia kept them to the back streets without Doris having to ask, and she moved with a quietness and certainty that she wouldn't have been able to explain to anyone who asked, because she couldn't have explained it to herself. She was simply moving, simply doing what came next. When they walked through the back door of Briggs's boarding house, and Mercer looked up and saw Doris Aldrich standing behind her, something shifted in his face, not surprise this time. Something that was considerably warmer than surprise. "You brought her back," Briggs said, and his voice carried a disbelief that was slowly converting itself into something else. "She found me," Lydia said simply. She reached into her coat and set the oilskin package on the table. "The copies are here. She's ready to give a statement." She looked at Mercer. "You said you could get her to Aldrich tonight." "I said I could," he said. He was still looking at her, that clear gray gaze that gave away less than most, and still somehow gave away more than he probably intended. "I didn't say it would be simple." "I didn't ask for simple," Lydia said. "I asked for possible." Doris sat down across from Briggs and pressed both hands flat on the table, steadying herself. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. And Mercer pulled up a chair, sat across from her, and began to lay it out, careful, methodical, precise, while Lydia stood at the window and watched the dark street outside, and felt something move through her that was not quite fear and not quite courage, but lived in the exact territory between the two where everything that actually mattered seemed to happen. She had left home yesterday morning. She had left as a girl being traded for a debt. She was not that girl anymore. Outside, Helena went about its night indifferent and loud, and entirely unaware that in a boarding house on a back street, the thing Josiah Crane had been building for 3 years was beginning very quietly to come apart. Mercer's plan for getting Doris to Aldrich was not complicated. That was the first thing Lydia noticed about it. Simple plans were harder to break than elaborate ones. Fewer moving parts meant fewer things that could go wrong in the dark, in a town where the wrong man might be watching any given corner. Aldrich was staying at the Federal Hotel on Commerce Street. He had 2 men with him. Federal deputies, not hired muscle, which mattered. Crane's men wouldn't move openly against a federal examiner. That was the one protection Aldrich's position provided, and it was real protection if thin. The problem was Fletcher. Her supervisor, Mercer said, laying it out at the table while Doris sat across from him with her hands folded tight, and Briggs stood at the window. "If Fletcher knows Doris has gone to Aldrich, he'll go to Crane, and Crane will move to discredit her before her statement can be recorded. He looked at Doris. "How much does Fletcher know about what you kept?" "He doesn't know about the copies," Doris said. Her voice was steadier now. She had the particular steadiness of someone who had made a decision and was on the other side of the fear it cost. "He knows I was present when the documents were changed. He'll assume I know what I saw. But he doesn't know I documented it." "Then we have a window," Mercer said. "Small one." He looked at Lydia. "Fletcher will know Doris didn't go home tonight. By morning he'll be asking questions. We need Doris in front of Aldridge and her statement recorded before Fletcher realizes she's moved." "How long does a sworn statement take?" Lydia asked. "An hour, maybe less if Aldridge is efficient." He glanced at Briggs. "Is he efficient?" "From what I can tell, yes." Briggs turned from the window. "He's not a political appointment. He's a working examiner, been doing this 15 years. He knows what he's looking at when he sees it." "Then we go tonight," Lydia said. "Right now. Not in the morning, not at first light. Now." Both men looked at her. "Crane's men are watching the streets," she said. "But they're watching for Mercer, and they're watching for Briggs. They're not watching for a woman and a female clerk taking an evening walk to a hotel." She looked at Doris. "Can you walk calmly for 4 blocks?" Doris met her eyes. "I've been walking calmly past men who wanted to terrify me into silence for 8 months, she said. "Yes, I can walk 4 blocks. Something passed between them. Brief, wordless, the particular understanding that moves between women who recognize each other's specific kind of courage. Mercer looked at Lydia for a moment. "I'll be behind you, 30 yards back. You won't see me." "I know," she said. They went out into the night. The 4 blocks to the Federal Hotel were the longest 4 blocks Lydia had ever walked. She kept her pace unhurried, kept her chin level, kept a light conversation going with Doris about nothing, the price of calico and Helena, whether the milliner on 2nd Street was still in business, the kind of talk that 2 women might have walking anywhere on any evening. Doris matched her tone so precisely that Lydia felt a flash of admiration so sharp it was almost painful. They passed one of Crane's men at the corner of Commerce and 3rd. Lydia recognized the posture, the deliberate stillness of a man doing surveillance, and she looked directly at him for exactly the length of time a woman might look at a stranger on a street corner, which was briefly and without interest, and then looked away. He didn't move. They went into the Federal Hotel. The man at the desk looked up. Lydia said with the calm authority of someone who had every right to be there, "We need to speak with Examiner Aldridge. Tell him it concerns the land filing investigation, and that we have documentary evidence and a witness statement. He'll want to hear this tonight." The desk man blinked. "Ma'am, it's past 9 o'clock. "I understand the hour," Lydia said. "Tell him what I told you. He can decide." He went upstairs. Came back 2 minutes later with a different expression. The expression of a man who had conveyed a message and received a response that surprised him. "He'll see you," he said. "Room 7. Aldridge was a compact man in his late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the alert assessing quality of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time and still took it seriously. He looked at Lydia, looked at Doris, looked at the oilskin package in Lydia's hands, and said without preamble, "Sit down. Start at the beginning." Doris sat down. She started at the beginning. Lydia sat to her left and slightly back, and she watched Aldridge's face as Doris talked. Watched him move from cautious attention to focused attention, to the very specific stillness of a man encountering evidence that confirms a pattern he had suspected but couldn't yet prove. He asked questions precise, practical, the kind that tested recollection rather than leading it. Doris answered every one of them, without hesitation, without looking at Lydia for reassurance, without softening anything. When Doris finished, Aldridge sat back and looked at the copies spread across the table. "Crane came to me 2 days ago," he said. "Told me these complaints were manufactured. Showed me documentation suggesting the original claims were fraudulent." He paused. "The documentation he showed me was very clean. Very complete." He looked at Doris. "Cleaner than documents usually are after 12 years on file." "Because they weren't 12 years old," Doris said. They were made last month. Yes, Aldridge said quietly. I'm beginning to believe that. He looked at Lydia. You said you have additional letters. Sworn statements from displaced families. She produced the oilskin packet Mercer had given her on the mountain, laid it beside Doris's copies. Aldridge looked at the combined documentation for a long moment. This is sufficient to compel full production of the county records, he said, and to reopen the review that Crane told me was unnecessary. He looked up. I'll need Miss Aldrich's formal sworn statement recorded by my clerk first thing in the morning. Can you ensure she's available? Yes, Lydia said. And the man who assembled the letters and the survey map, he'll need to be available to testify as to their provenance. He's here in Helena, Lydia said. He'll be available. Aldridge nodded slowly. Then he looked at her directly, the frank, appraising look of a man taking real measure of a person. You rode here from the Gallatin Valley, he said. It wasn't entirely a question. Yes, sir. In 2 days. Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment. Miss Carter, he said, I've been doing this work for 15 years. In that time I have had evidence brought to me by lawyers, by politicians, by ranchers with money and connections, and every kind of leverage. He paused. I don't believe I've ever had it brought to me by a farmer's daughter who rode 2 days through the Bitterroots. He picked up one of Doris's copies. That speaks well of what we're looking at. Lydia said nothing. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, which felt like the right choice. They left the hotel 20 minutes later, and Mercer materialized from the shadows of the alley across the street, as if he'd been part of the building. He looked at Lydia's face, read it, and said, He'll move. First thing in the morning, she said. He needs Doris's statement recorded, and he wants you available to testify. Mercer nodded. Something had eased in the set of his jaw. Not relief exactly, but the specific loosening of a man who has been carrying a weight for 2 years and has just felt it shift. You did well, he said. Doris did well, Lydia said. I just walked 4 blocks. Doris made a sound that was almost a laugh. Mercer looked at Lydia for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he turned and led them back to Briggs's boarding house through the dark. They slept in shifts. Mercer insisted on it not just for himself, but for all of them. 4 hours then up and watching. Lydia woke at 2 in the morning to find him at the window again, and told herself she needed to stop being surprised by that. She went to stand beside him. Quiet, he said without her asking. How long have you been doing this? She said, watching Crane, collecting evidence, living on the mountain and tracking what moves through the valley. He was quiet for a moment. Since Crane took the second holding, Briggs's family. He looked out at the street. I watched it happen and I didn't have enough to stop it. That's a particular kind of weight to carry. You couldn't have known earlier. I should have. His voice wasn't self-pitying. It was simply the statement of a man who held himself to a specific standard and measured his distance from it honestly. I was too far removed. I'd been on that mountain long enough that I'd stopped paying attention to what happened in the valley. Told myself it wasn't my business. He paused. Your grandfather would have been ashamed of that. He also would have told you that you can't watch every direction at once, Lydia said. Mercer looked at her. The faint available light caught the angle of his face, and she saw something there that she hadn't seen before, not quite surprise, but the near neighbor of it, as if he hadn't expected to be answered that way. He used to say, she continued quietly, that a man who spends all his time regretting the last bridge he didn't cross will walk off the next one. She paused. You crossed this one. That's what counts. Silence. He taught you well, Mercer said. He did, she said. So did poverty and a bad season and Josiah Crane showing up in our yard. She looked back out at the street. Difficulty's a teacher too. Not a kind one, but a thorough one. They stood in the dark together without speaking for a while, and Lydia noticed that the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of 2 people who didn't know each other well enough to fill it. It was the other kind of silence. The kind that doesn't need filling. She went back to sleep just before 3. The knock came at 4:30 in the morning. Not the front door, the back. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. Mercer was on his feet before the sound finished and had the back door open before Lydia had fully sat up. The man outside was young, poorly dressed, breathing hard. He looked at Mercer with wide eyes and said, "Mr. Briggs sent me. He said tell you Fletcher's moving. He got word tonight that Doris left the house and he went straight to Crane." The room woke up completely in about 4 seconds. "When?" Mercer said. "Hour ago, maybe more. Briggs said Crane's got men heading for the hotel. He thinks they're going to try to get to Aldridge before morning." Mercer turned, looked at Lydia, looked at Doris, who had gone pale but steady. "Get dressed," he said. "Both of you, now." They were out the back in under 3 minutes. Mercer moved them through the back streets at a pace that was just short of running fast enough to cover ground slow enough not to draw the attention that running drew. Lydia matched him step for step. Doris was right behind her, breathing audibly, but keeping up. "They can't touch Aldridge directly," Mercer said low, and even as they moved. "Harming a federal examiner is a federal crime, but they can discredit him. They can put something in front of him, fabricated counter-evidence, a false deposition that creates enough confusion to delay the review past his departure window." He turned a corner. "Or they can get to Doris." "Get to her how?" Lydia said. "Frighten her enough to recant. Or take her out of Helena entirely and produce an affidavit forged, stating she's withdrawn her cooperation." He stopped, listened, moved again. "Crane's done both before." "Then we get to Aldridge first," Lydia said. "That's exactly what we're doing." They came onto Commerce Street from the east end, which meant they approached the Federal Hotel from the opposite direction from where Crane's men would be coming. Lydia could see the hotel ahead. She could also see half a block behind them now, in the thin pre-dawn dark, 2 men moving with the wrong kind of purpose on the main street. "Don't look back," Mercer said. "I see them." "Then move." They went through the hotel's front door, and Lydia went straight to the desk and said with a clarity that cut through the half-asleep desk man's confusion like a blade, "Get Aldridge down here right now. Tell him Crane's men are in the street and we need his deputies present. Go." The man went. Mercer put himself between the door and Doris without being theatrical about it. Just moved to that position and stood there. Lydia stood to his left and slightly forward and pulled out her uncle's knife, not brandishing it, just holding it at her side available. Mercer glanced at the knife, then at her. "You know how to use that," he said. It wasn't a question. "My uncle taught me," she said. "Good uncle." The 2 men came through the door 40 seconds later. They stopped when they saw Mercer. The taller one, she'd seen him before. She realized at the cabin on the mountain trail, looked at Mercer, looked at Doris, looked at Lydia standing to Mercer's left with her knife down at her side, and did a very fast recalculation. "Mercer," the taller man said. "Harlan." Mercer's voice was completely even. "You want to be very careful about what you do next." "We're just here to speak with Miss Aldrich." "Miss Aldrich doesn't want to speak with you. That's not your decision." "She's made her statement," Mercer said. "It's been witnessed. The documentation is in Aldridge's possession. Whatever Crane sent you here to accomplish, Harlan, it's already too late." He paused, let that land. "Go back and tell him that. It's done." Harlan's jaw tightened. His eyes moved around the lobby, calculating exits angles odds. Aldridge came down the stairs at that moment, with both deputies behind him, and he took in the scene in the hotel lobby with the rapid, practiced assessment of a man who had walked into difficult rooms before. He looked at the 2 men from Crane. He looked at Mercer. He looked at Doris. "Miss Aldrich," he said. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir," Doris said. Aldridge looked at Crane's 2 men. "Gentlemen," he said with a quietness that was considerably more authoritative than any amount of volume could have been. "I'm a federal land examiner in the active conduct of an investigation. These individuals are material witnesses under my protection as of 11 o'clock last evening." He let that settle. If either of you interferes with them, their testimony, or this investigation in any way, I will have you both arrested by noon today on charges of obstruction of federal process." He looked at them steadily. "Are we clear?" Harlan stood very still. Then he looked at Mercer one more time, a look that carried about 3 different kinds of message in it, none of them friendly, and he turned and walked out. The second man followed. The door closed. The lobby was very quiet. Doris sat down on the nearest chair because her legs had made that decision for her, and Lydia came and sat beside her, and didn't say anything, just sat close enough that their shoulders touched, which was sometimes the only thing that helped. Mercer turned to Aldridge. "They'll go to Crane. He'll know it's over." "Good," Aldridge said. "I prefer my subjects to know the investigation is proceeding before I compel production of their records. It tends to clarify their thinking about cooperation." He looked at Mercer with the same direct attention he'd given Lydia the night before. "You're the man who assembled the letters and the survey documentation." "Yes. I'll need your full testimony this morning, an hour, perhaps 2. Aldridge glanced at the door. "Given the circumstances, I'll also be sending word to the federal marshal's office in Helena at first light. I want a marshal present when I compel those county records." He paused. "Crane is going to fight this." "He will," Mercer agreed. "Can he produce counter-evidence convincing enough to muddy the record?" Mercer considered this. "He'll try. He has resources and he has men willing to commit perjury." He paused. "But the original survey map is dated and witnessed by a federal surveyor who retired to Oregon 2 years ago. Crane can't touch that documentation, and it directly contradicts his filed claim on 3 of the 4 holdings." He met Aldridge's eyes. "He can muddy it. He can't clean it." Aldridge nodded slowly. "Then we proceed at first light." He looked at Lydia. "Miss Carter, I want your statement as well specifically regarding the events at your family's homestead. What Crane attempted, how it was conducted, what was said." He paused. "That kind of testimony establishes pattern. Juries respond to pattern." "Juries," Lydia said. "This goes to trial." "If I have what I think I have, yes," Aldridge said. "Fraud, extortion, filing of false instruments in a federal land office. Those are federal charges, Miss Carter. Crane won't be negotiating his way out of this one." She sat with that for a moment. The word trial had a weight to it she hadn't fully anticipated, not because she doubted it was warranted, but because it made everything suddenly larger and more real and longer lasting than a plan executed in darkness and urgency. "All right," she said. "I'll give you whatever you need." By the time the first light came through the windows of the Federal Hotel, Doris had given her formal statement. Mercer had given his testimony, and Lydia had told a federal land examiner everything that had happened in her father's yard 2 mornings ago in exact and unflinching detail. She had not cried telling it. She had not needed to. The facts were enough. Aldridge's clerk recorded everything in a precise hand. When it was done, Aldridge stood and looked at the 3 of them with something in his expression that was professional and measured, but not quite free of feeling. "I want you all to understand something," he said. "What you've brought me this morning, the documentation, the testimony, this is the difference between a man like Crane continuing to operate for another 10 years, or being stopped here." He paused. "I've seen too many cases where no one brought me what I needed, where people were afraid or bought off or simply exhausted into silence." He looked at Doris. "Your courage in coming forward, Miss Aldrich, is worth more than you probably know right now." Doris pressed her lips together and looked at the table and nodded once. "The marshal arrives at 8, Aldridge said. "I'd like you all to remain available in Helena for the next 24 hours in case I need additional clarification." He looked at Mercer. "Can you manage that?" "Yes," Mercer said. They went back to Briggs's boarding house through the early morning streets, and Briggs met them at the door with coffee he'd apparently been making for the last hour, on the theory that they would need it, and for a little while they sat around the table, and nobody said much because there wasn't much left to say about what they'd done. It was done, and the next part was Aldridge's, and all they could do now was wait. Lydia held her coffee cup in both hands and felt the warmth of it move through her palms, and thought about her father standing at the fence post watching them ride out 2 days ago, and her mother's hand holding on too long at the door, and the way the morning had started with a pen and a paper and a debt that had felt like the end of everything. Mercer was sitting across the table from her. He looked tired, the particular tiredness of someone who had been running on will and vigilance and experience for long enough that the body was starting to send reminders. But his eyes were clear and steady, and when they met hers across the table, they held something that she didn't have a clean word for. "It's going to hold," she said quietly. "What we brought him, it's going to hold." "Yes," he said. "I think it is. Crane's gonna know it was you. He's going to come after you. He's already been coming after me for 2 years." Something almost wry moved across his face. "He hasn't managed it yet. He'll try harder." "Let him try harder." He set down his cup. "I'll still be on that mountain, same as always." She looked at him, thought about the mountain, the timber, and the rock, and the cold creek, and the nighthawk at dusk, and the specific silence that was solitude rather than loneliness. Thought about the way he had sat watch in the dark without being asked, and laid out facts without softening them, and said she deserves better than being used as currency in her father's kitchen, like it was simply obvious. She thought about going home. She should go home. Her family needed her. The homestead needed her. There was nothing holding her here now except the 24 hours Aldridge had requested. And after that, she could ride south with Mercer back down through the Bitterroots back to the valley, back to her mother and her brothers and her father, who had signed a paper he was ashamed of and needed to be told that she didn't hold it against him. All of that was true. And also she realized, sitting in Briggs's kitchen in the early morning light, with the coffee warming her hands and the weight of the last 2 days beginning to settle into her bones, she was not the same person who had left. Something had changed in the riding and the dark and the 4 blocks to the Federal Hotel. Something had changed in herself. She could feel it the way you feel a healed bone, same structure, different density. Briggs refilled everyone's coffee without asking. Doris had her head down on her folded arms at the table asleep, which was possibly the most reasonable response to the last 12 hours that anyone had offered. Outside, Helena was waking up. Aldridge's clerk was writing out the formal compulsion order for the county records. Somewhere across town, Josiah Crane was receiving a report from Harlan, and whatever was on Crane's face right now, she would not need to see it to understand it. She looked at Mercer. He was looking at her. "Thank you," she said. It felt insufficient. It was the only word she had. "You did most of it," he said. "You started it." "Your grandfather started it," he said. 20 years ago on a road in Missouri." He paused. "Some debts take a long time to pay. This one came out right, though." Something moved in his voice, quiet and certain, and weighted with more than the words themselves. "I think it came out exactly right." She held his gaze across the table, and the morning light moved through the window, and Doris slept, and Briggs quietly washed cups. And the world outside continued about its business, entirely unaware that something had been set in motion in a federal examiner's room that would take Josiah Crane apart, piece by careful piece. And Lydia Carter, who had left home as collateral and arrived in Helena as something considerably more than that, drank her coffee and felt for the first time in 2 days that she could breathe all the way down. The 24 hours Aldridge had requested turned into 36. Nobody complained about it. Nobody had the energy to. The federal marshal arrived at 8 in the morning, as promised, a tall, deliberate man named Cassius Holt, who shook Aldridge's hand, read the compulsion order, and said with the satisfied economy of a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of work, "Let's go get those records." He took 2 deputies with him to the county clerk's office and didn't invite Fletcher's opinion about it. Mercer, Lydia, Briggs, and Doris waited. Waiting was its own kind of work. Lydia had learned that on the homestead, the waiting while the weather made up its mind. The waiting while the bank decided the waiting, while the season turned, and you didn't yet know which way. You learned to do something with your hands, while your mind ran the worst possibilities, and your body held itself together around them. She repaired a split in August's saddle girth with a needle and waxed thread Briggs produced from a drawer. Mercer sat at the table and went through the original survey map one more time, not because he needed to, but because it was something to do with his hands that also happened to be useful. Doris sat with Briggs, and they talked quietly, the low, careful conversation of two people who had been carrying the same weight in separate rooms for a long time, and were only now finding out the other person had been there all along. At 10:30, one of Aldridge's clerks knocked at the back door. Mercer opened it. "Mr. Aldridge sent me," the young man said. He was trying to keep his face professional and not quite managing it. There was something bright underneath it, something that wanted to be news. Fletcher tried to destroy 3 of the filing boxes when the marshal arrived. Holt arrested him on the spot. He paused. And they found the originals. The actual original filings hidden behind a false panel in the records room. Every document Miss Aldrich described. All of it. The kitchen went completely silent. Then Briggs put both hands flat on the table and closed his eyes and didn't say anything for a long moment. And the silence he held was the kind that comes after years of something, not after hours. "Crane," Mercer said, "Mr. Aldridge has issued a formal request for his appearance," the clerk said. "The marshal is delivering it personally." He looked at Mercer. "Mr. Aldridge also said to tell you, and I'm quoting, exactly tell Mercer, the survey map was the key. Everything else confirmed what that map proved." Mercer looked at the map still spread on the table. "Good," he said quietly. That was all. The clerk left. Lydia looked at Mercer across the kitchen and saw something in his face that she had not seen there before in any of the days she had known him, a loosening so deep and complete that it changed the whole architecture of his expression. Not happiness exactly. Something older and quieter than happiness. The particular piece of a man who has been fighting a long fight and has just heard for the first time that it is going to end the way it should. She wanted to say something. She couldn't find words sufficient to the moment, so she didn't try. She just looked at him and he looked at her, and that was enough. Doris started crying, not dramatically, not with any sound, just tears moving down her face while she stared at the table. Briggs put a hand on her shoulder and left it there. They had a meal together at midday, the 4 of them at Briggs's kitchen table. It was simple food, beans and cornbread and coffee, and nobody said much, but the silence had a different texture now. Warm rather than taut. The silence of people who have been through something together and are on the other side of it. At 2 in the afternoon, Aldridge sent word that Josiah Crane had appeared before him with a lawyer and had, in the lawyer's precise legal language, declined to answer questions pending his own review of the allegations. "That means he knows it's real," Mercer said. "A man who thinks the evidence is thin argues. A man who knows it's solid lawyered up." "How long before he's formally charged?" Lydia asked. "Aldridge will take his findings to the federal prosecutor in Helena. Could be a week, could be 2. Mercer folded the message and set it down. "But the compulsion order on the records means Crane can't touch them now. They're in federal custody." He looked at her. "Your family's homestead is protected from this moment forward. The original filing dates are confirmed. Crane has no legal claim." She absorbed this. Let it move through her fully all the way down the way she hadn't been able to breathe 2 mornings ago. "I need to go home," she said. "I know," he said. "My father needs to hear this from me, not from a letter. From me in person standing in that kitchen." "Yes," he paused. "We'll leave in the morning." She looked at him. "You don't have to ride back with me." "I know," he said again, and said nothing else, which was its own kind of answer. They left Helena before sunrise. The ride back was different from the ride in lighter. In some way she couldn't fully articulate, as if the weight they'd been carrying toward the city had been set down there, and they were returning with their hands free. Mercer chose the direct route this time, the valley road moving openly and without evasion. There was no need for evasion now. Crane's operation was under federal examination. His men were quiet, and the word traveled fast in mountain country. By the time they hit the first settlement on the South Road, 3 different men had stopped to tell Mercer they'd heard about the county records, heard about the marshal, heard about Fletcher's arrest. "Is it true?" one of them asked. A weathered rancher from the look of him standing beside his wagon on the road. Crane's going to be charged. Evidence is in federal hands, Mercer said. Yes. The man stood there for a moment. Then he looked away down the road and said very quietly, "My cousin lost his holding 18 months ago. Said Crane had documents he couldn't argue with." He paused. "Maybe now he can. Aldridge will be reviewing all the displaced holdings," Mercer said. "Tell your cousin to write a letter to the federal land office in Helena. Don't wait." The man nodded, looked at Lydia, touched his hat full removal, she noticed. "Ma'am?" She nodded back. They rode on. That exchange happened 3 more times before they cleared the settlement. Different men, same story, same quiet, contained relief of people who had been told the thing they'd been counting on couldn't be fought and were now finding out it could. Lydia watched Mercer handle each one the same way, direct, informative, no extra words, no performance of triumph, and thought about what it meant to live in a place for 11 years, to know its rhythms and its people and its specific ways of suffering, and to have spent 2 of those years doing something about it in the particular quiet way he did everything. "They know you," she said when they were back on the open road. "Some of them. They trust you." He was quiet for a moment. "Trust takes time to build, and seconds to lose," he said. "I try to be worth it." A pause. "Don't always manage." "You managed this time," she said. He didn't answer that, but she saw the shift at the corner of his mouth that she had come to understand was the closest he generally got to acknowledgement. They made good time. The second night they camped in the same place they had on the way up the rock shelf above the narrow valley, the seep of water running down the granite face. Mercer built the fire the same way, the same efficient, unsentimental process, and they ate and didn't talk for a while, and the nighthawk made its sound in the dark above them. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You've been asking me things for 3 days," he said. "I don't see why you'd stop now." She almost smiled. "The river accident," she said. "When I was a child." She watched his face. "Briggs mentioned it. He said you told him years ago when you first started working together that you'd seen a girl pulled out of the Gallatin River when you were passing through the valley. That you'd watched a man go in after her." She paused. "He said you remembered it because you almost went in yourself, and the man who beat you to it was Elias Carter." Mercer looked at the fire. "Was that me?" she said. "The girl." A long silence. "You were about 7, he said. "Small, dark-haired. You'd gone after a dog that had fallen in off the bank." He paused. "The dog made it out on its own. You didn't." She sat with this. "I was 22, he said. "I was about 30 feet away, and I was moving toward the bank when your grandfather hit the water. He was 60 yards away, and he beat me to it by 10 seconds. Something in his voice was careful, tending a memory, the way you tend something fragile. "He pulled you out. You were fine. Scared and half drowned, but fine." He looked up from the fire. "He didn't know I'd seen it. He never knew." "But you knew who I was," she said. "When you rode into our yard." "I recognized the homestead," he said. "Elias had described it once, and then I saw you and I—" He stopped. "You have his eyes," he said simply. "Same shape. Same way of looking at something directly and not looking away." He picked up a stick, turned it. "I knew who you were." Lydia was quiet for a long time. "You came to pay a debt," she said slowly. "And you stayed because—" "Because it was right to stay," he said. His voice was flat and clear and completely honest. "That's all. I'm not going to make it into something it isn't." "I'm not asking you to," she said. "I'm just asking you to finish the sentence." He looked at her, that gray gaze direct and undefended. "Because it was right to stay," he said. "And because I wanted to." A pause. "Both things are true. I don't see the need to rank them." She held his gaze across the fire and felt something move through her that was warm and complicated, and not entirely comfortable, the way real things rarely were. She didn't reach for a word for it. She just let it be what it was. "All right," she said quietly. He looked back at the fire. They slept. In the morning, they rode south. By late afternoon of the third day, the valley opened up below them, and she could see the homestead from the ridge. The thin line of smoke from the chimney that meant her mother was cooking supper. The small figures of her brothers in the field that she could identify from this distance only by the way they moved. Her chest did something complicated and painful and good. Mercer pulled up on the ridge beside her and looked down. "I'll come down with you," he said. "Speak with your father, and then I'll ride on." She turned to look at him. "Back to the mountain." "Yes." She looked at the homestead below, at the smoke, at her brother's small, distant figures, at everything that was home and known and unchanged by the last 4 days, even though she was entirely changed by them. "You said solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing," she said. "I did." "Do you still believe that?" He was quiet. "I believe it's true," he said carefully. "Whether it's always enough, that's a different question." She looked at him. "Is it enough now?" The question sat in the air between them, plain and direct, and carrying more weight than its few words suggested. She watched him receive it, watched him take it seriously, not deflect it, not answer it faster than it deserved. "It's been enough for 11 years, he said finally. "That's not what I asked." A long pause. "No," he said, "it isn't." He looked at her, really looked the way he had looked at the survey map, at the trail, at the things that required his full and honest attention. "No. Right now it isn't quite enough." She held that answer, turned it carefully in her mind. "Then don't ride back tonight," she said. He said nothing. "Stay for supper," she said. "My father needs to hear what happened. My mother needs to meet the man who kept her daughter alive through the Bitterroots. My brothers need to see that the world has men in it worth looking up to." She paused. "And after supper, you can decide about the mountain." Another long pause. "That's a reasonable argument," he said. "I have more of them if you need them." Something moved across his face, unguarded, brief, warmer than anything she'd seen there. He looked back down at the homestead. "Your grandfather," he said, "never once made a reasonable argument in his life. He just acted on what was right and let the arguments sort themselves out after." "I know," she said. "I'm my own person." "Yes," he said. "You very much are." They rode down off the ridge together. Her mother came out of the house before they reached the fence, the way mothers always know. Somehow the particular alertness that doesn't need to be explained. She stopped at the gate and looked at Lydia. All of Lydia, with the searching assessment of a woman who needs to know her child is whole before she can allow herself anything else. Then her face changed. She came through the gate and put her arms around Lydia and held on, and Lydia let herself be held, and pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and breathed in the smell of wood smoke and bread and home. Her brothers came running from the field, shouting her name in the way of boys who have been worrying and refusing to admit it and are expressing their relief as noise. Her father came to the fence. He looked at her, then at Mercer sitting his horse with his hat in his hands, then back at her, a long, careful look that asked everything and said nothing, the way her father communicated when words were too small for what he was feeling. "Papa," she said, "it's done. Crane's finished. Aldridge has the records and the testimony and the original survey maps. Fletcher was arrested. The federal marshal has it now." She held his gaze. "Your land is yours. No one's taking it." Her father's jaw moved. His eyes went red at the rims the same way they had in the kitchen 4 days ago, but completely differently. Not the red of a man collapsing under weight, but the red of a man putting weight down after too long. He looked at Mercer. "You kept her safe," he said. His voice was rough. "She kept herself safe," Mercer said. "I just rode alongside." Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the fence gate and stood to the side of it and looked at Mercer in the particular way of a man who is saying something without saying it. An invitation and an acknowledgement and a kind of apology all at once. "There's supper on," he said. "If you've a mind to stay." Mercer looked at Lydia. She looked back at him. "I've a mind to stay," he said. He swung down from the Appaloosa and led the horse through the gate, and her father fell into step beside him, and the two men walked toward the house together with the careful, measuring gait of men who didn't know each other yet, but were willing to start. Lydia watched them go. Her mother appeared at her elbow and looked at Mercer's broad back crossing the yard. "Who is he?" she said quietly. "A man who knew grandfather," Lydia said. "A man who rides 11 years through the mountains paying his debts forward." She paused. "A man who came when we needed one." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Is he going to stay?" Lydia watched him reach the porch steps, watched him stand back to let her father go first, watched the small deliberate courtesy of it, the particular respect of a man who understood what that threshold meant to the person who owned it. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But he's staying for supper." Her mother made a small sound that was not quite approval, but was close enough to it to feel warm. They went inside. The supper table that night held more than food. It held the particular fullness of a family that had been close to losing everything and hadn't gathered around lamplight, while the summer dark came down outside and the Bitterroots stood in their old patience to the north. And a man from the mountain sat at the table among them and answered her father's careful questions with the same directness he brought to everything. Her brothers stared at Mercer with the open, unself-conscious admiration of boys who had not yet learned to pretend they weren't impressed. He answered their questions about the mountains with the same seriousness he brought to everything. And Lydia watched her youngest brother, 9 years old, still at the age of complete sincerity, lean toward Mercer across the table and say with absolute conviction, "I want to learn to track like that someday." Mercer looked at him. "It takes patience," he said, "more patience than most people think they have." "I have patience," the boy said. "Eli, you can't wait 10 minutes for cornbread to cool," his older brother said. "That's different." "How is it different? That's food. This is important." Mercer's mouth moved in the way it moved when something almost became a smile. "He's got the right instinct," he said to no one in particular. "The wanting to matters as much as the having." After supper, her father took Mercer out to the porch while her mother and brothers cleared the table, and Lydia stood at the window and watched the two of them in the dark. Her father's hands moving as he talked the old habit of a man who thinks with his hands, and Mercer standing still and listening with the full weight of his attention. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. After a while, Mercer said something, and her father nodded slowly. Then her father extended his hand, and Mercer shook it, and it was the kind of handshake that meant something specific and real. He came back inside, while her father stayed on the porch with his thoughts. "He's a good man," Mercer said to her. "He made a bad decision under terrible pressure," she said. "That's not the same as being bad." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at her steadily. "I told him that." She looked at him. "What else did you tell him?" A pause. The particular pause of someone choosing how much to put into words and how much to let stand as simply itself. "That I'd like to come back," he said. "If that's acceptable." The lamplight was warm in the kitchen. Outside, the summer night held the sound of crickets and the far dark shape of the mountains. Her mother was in the next room pretending not to listen, which was something mothers were constitutionally unable to prevent themselves from doing. "That's acceptable," Lydia said. "I have things to finish in Helena," he said. "Aldridge will need my testimony available for the proceedings. Briggs is going to need support organizing the other displaced families for their claims." He paused. "That's weeks of work, maybe longer." "I know," she said. "And the mountain—" He stopped, looked at her. "I've been on that mountain a long time, Lydia. I'm not certain I know how to be anywhere else." "You sat at this table for 2 hours tonight," she said. "You seemed to manage." Something shifted in his eyes. "That's different." "How is it different?" He was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly he said, "You know how it's different." She did. She knew exactly how it was different. She had known it somewhere around the second morning on the trail, and she had been honest enough with herself to admit it, and careful enough with both of them not to rush it. "Come back when the work in Helena is done," she said. "Come back when you're ready. The homestead will be here." She paused. "I'll be here." He looked at her for a long moment. Something settled in his face, not resolution, which implied the end of something, but the other kind of settling, the kind that happens at the beginning. "All right," he said. He left the next morning before full light, the way he did everything without ceremony, with complete intention, hat on and horse ready, and the bitter roots still dark against the early sky. Lydia stood at the fence gate and watched him go. He turned once at the edge of the tree line and looked back. She raised her hand. He touched the brim of his hat. Then he rode north back toward the mountains and the work that waited, and she stood at the gate until she couldn't see him anymore, and then stood there a moment longer. Her youngest brother appeared at her elbow. "Is he coming back?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She said it with the certainty of someone who has learned to read the things that matter in the space between words and knows the difference between a man who says what he means and a man who doesn't. "He's coming back." She turned away from the tree line and walked back to the house and her mother and her brothers and her father, who was already at the fence, mending the post that had needed mending for a month. And the smoke was rising from the chimney, and the morning was coming on warm and clear and full of the particular golden quality that summer mornings had in that valley when everything was right. The land was theirs. The debt was paid. The mountain man was riding north with the intention of returning, and the woman who had left as collateral and come home as something else entirely stepped back onto the porch of the house where she had been born and felt the solid weight of the boards beneath her feet, and knew with a completeness that needed no decoration that whatever came next was going to be built on ground that no one could take from her. Some things once earned belong to you in a way that goes deeper than any document, any deed, any name on any filing, in any county office, in any state. They live in the bone. They live in the particular way you stand on your own ground and do not flinch. Lydia Carter stood on her ground and did not flinch. And far to the north, Caleb Mercer rode toward the mountains with the knowledge quiet and certain, settled in the